The first Castlevania series on Netflix has long been heralded as the best animated video game adaptation of all time. I mean, hell, it's the best video game adaptation of all time. So when they announced that Castlevania was finally coming back after just 2 years of waiting desperately, fans of both the anime and the games obviously rejoiced. And while certainly not one-to-one, the original series tread a fine line between not just being a great show, but also not alienating fans of the games like myself. And having 4 solid seasons of success, I think left the majority of us feeling like these guys could do no wrong. They understood the source material, they understood the fans, they knew what we wanted, and they delivered it to us on a silver platter. And with such a successful track record, how could they possibly mess anything up? On top of that, not only was Castlevania coming back, but it was coming back with a vengeance. I mean, there are so many stories and games to choose from, seeing as the original series covered Castlevania 3, they could have gone forward and covered Castlevania 1 and 2, or even done something like Circle of the Moon, make a little side series. But instead, they made it very clear that they wanted to deliver and deliver hard. For those in the know, the teaser trailers that they dropped specifically pointed to one character and one game, and that was Richter Belmont and Castlevania Rondo of Blood. And there's about a billion reasons why this is so cool, and I'm going to be getting to them shortly. But one thing was clear, we were about to experience something that could only be made with heart and care. Not just a sequel to the best video game adaptation of all time, but the new best video game adaptation of all time. So, how was Castlevania Nocturne? Let's take a look. Hey guys, Mike here. Just wanted to real talk with you for a minute. You know what I hate doing? Ads. So I'm not doing one this time. This is just me talking to you realistically, okay? A lot of people think that YouTubers are rich and live this crazy lifestyle, and honestly, that's not true. Most of us are hanging on by the skin of our teeth. Yes, including yours truly. With us doing new, longer form content like we have been doing, we've had to hire on some help, and honestly, the only way that we are able to afford that is through our Patreon. Since we started this channel, Patreon has been its lifeblood. It's what's kept it going through the good times and especially the bad times. We offer a ton of good rewards for signing up with us, and honestly, just having the community the way that it is amazing. $3 gets you into the private Discord forever, and if you maintain that, you get a bunch of bonuses. The more you pay, the more you get. Now, if you're the type of person who's afraid of commitment, we have other options as well. Right now, if you use our code BPOP on Gamer Subs, next 24 hours you get free shipping and 1 free sample. So you can get a free sample and get it shipped for free just to try it. We have merch right there below the video. And you can come follow me on Twitch, especially if you're part of the fighting game community. Me and Tyler are also doing a stream where we're playing Baldur's Gate with the chat. Basically what I'm saying is that we love doing what we do and we want to continue to do it, but honestly we need your help. So if you can find it in your hearts, find it in your wallets, we would super duper appreciate it. That's it for me this time. Back to the video. So as I mentioned before, the hardcore fans of the games knew from the trailers that this season was going to be covering Rondo of Blood. The reason this is particularly awesome is because up until recently, Rondo of Blood was a very difficult game to come by in the West. The better known version of it here is called Dracula X. It was very watered down and it was put out on the Super Nintendo in 1995. The real Rondo of Blood's only wide Western release, and I use that term lightly, was on the PSP in 2007. And it was a 2.5D remake. The original PC Engine Super CD-ROM squared version was built into that remake, but you had to unlock it by playing the 2.5D. And if you don't know what a PC Engine is, don't worry about it. We didn't get them here. In the States, at least, it was called the TurboGrafx 16, and between the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo, that console didn't really leave that much of an impact. Not that Rondo of Blood was even ported to its CD add-on, but whatever. Basically, the true original Rondo of Blood has a fervent cult following dating all the way back into the 90s when super nerds used to import Japanese consoles here so they could play games that weren't released in the West. This is the ultimate Castlevania fans' Castlevania, and it was the second to last in the series to follow the original format of the games, which was basically, left to right, run, jump, whip format, before it was turned into 3D or the Metroidvanias. The last OG formula game was Bloodlines for the Genesis or Mega Drive, but we'll get to that in a little bit. The other obvious connotation with Richter Belmont being the focus of this new series is that we were almost assured that we would be getting an animated adaptation of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, the sequel to Rondo of Blood, and arguably the most beloved Castlevania game of all time. And depending on which version you got for which console back in the day, you could play Symphony of the Night with Alucard, Maria, and Richter. So not only were deep cut fans going to be sated, but the wider audience was going to be sated as well, and everything sounds awesome. There's a reason that Super Smash Bros. Ultimate has Simon and Richter Belmont instead of Simon and Trevor. Richter's the best Belmont, fans of the series know that, Simon is the best known. So you got the deep cut fans and the wider audience, everybody's happy. The fact that the creators decided to do Castlevania 3 in the first place back in the original series just showed how well they knew what was going on. Castlevania 3 is arguably better than Castlevania 1 and 2. It's also the prequel to the entire series, taking place in 1476. That's of course if you don't count Lament of Innocence, which I barely do because, you know, that was like the 20th game in the series and it was a 3D one, but I digress. So having learned all that, let's talk about the story of Rondo of Blood. 1792, 19-year-old Richter Belmont, great-great-grandson of Simon Belmont, grandson of Juste Belmont, the two most powerful Belmonts in the line up until that point, witnesses the resurrection of Dracula's castle. Since the Belmont clan and Dracula are eternal enemies, Richter's love interest Annette is captured and brought to Dracula's castle along with an entire village full of people. Blessed with physical and magical might, Richter storms the castle in order to save Annette and the people from the village. Along the way, he runs into a 12-year-old girl named Maria who he saves from a dark priest, and it turns out that she is a long-lost relative of his. She's also a witch with the ability to summon spirit creatures. The game features multiple routes and endings, a litany of bosses, the succubus, death, and Dark Priest Shaft, who is kind of one of the most important characters in Rondo of Blood and Symphony of the Night, as he is the one who continually is resurrecting Dracula, amongst a bunch of other things like being a major boss. And you also have the ability to play through the game as Maria or Richter in Rondo of Blood, which is awesome. It's got anime voice cutscenes and streams directly into the beginning of Symphony of the Night, which takes place in the exact same throne room with the exact same version of Dracula that we see in Rondo of Blood. So the question is, how do you adapt that into an 8-episode anime, right? You got to think about the source material, okay? Gothic action adventure takes place entirely within a giant castle. You got a few main enemies, a few side characters, ends with a climactic battle between good and evil. Love interest is saved, then it's over. Here's how I do it, and it took me about 5 minutes to write this down. Okay, episode 1, you introduce the main character and the conflict. Have Richter growing up in the village show his happy days with the people and his Belmont training. You cut to Shaft and his evil cult trying to resurrect Dracula. On a peaceful day, Richter is about to confess his feelings to Annette when all of a sudden, Dracula's castle rises out of the ocean and he comes in, raining blood and terror on the town, kidnaps all the people, including Annette, and Richter has to go save her. Episode 2, Richter shows up at the castle. You show how Dracula's castle is ever changing. Maybe you take some of the people from the village and they're butchered, and you know, it really ups the tension. You introduce the succubus and death that are, you know, maybe generals alongside Shaft. There you go, you got a triad of bad guys that you have to get through until you get to Dracula. Episode 3, Richter rescues Maria. The two of them fight maybe against the succubus. Very cool fight, good introduction to Maria. Episode 4, you get Maria's backstory, find out why she's here, what her powers are, how she learned them, whatever. Her and Richter realize that they're related and they are fated by blood to take down Dracula. Episode 5, Shaft summons Death to go and capture Richter and Maria. They're captured. While that's going on, Death is gloating and explaining Shaft's plans and the deeds that he's already committed. Episode 6, Maria and Richter escape the clutches of Death and he is defeated using one of Maria's special spells. Episode 7, with the succubus and Death defeated, Shaft comes to the forefront. He has a net and he throws his dark magic and legions of demons against our heroes. He's defeated by Richter and Maria combining their magic in one last desperate attempt to take him down. Episode 8, big climax, right? Feeling the power that's binding him to the mortal plane waning because of Shaft's defeat, Dracula teleports Richter and Maria and Annette to his throne room where he's been feeding on the people of the village in order to regain his strength. A fight ensues and Dracula is defeated, but almost seemingly too easy. As the castle begins to crumble, Alucard shows up and is like, oh no, I'm too late. He then uses one of Dracula's magical devices to teleport everybody back to the village and explains that Shaft was only defeated in body, his spirit still exists, he still plans to resurrect Dracula, and then it's only going to be a matter of time. Boom! Next season, Symphony of the Night starts after a 5-year time skip. easy. So how did they do Castlevania Nocturne? Not like that, not even a smidge, not even a hint, not even close. Instead, Richter was born in the States, which is fine, whatever. His mother, Julia Belmont, his new character, whatever, teaches him how to use magic and be a vampire hunter. It's cool. She's killed in front of him by an Aztec sorcerer and vampire named Olrox in Boston, where she was going to ship Richter off to Europe, which again is cool, fine, tragic backstory makes for better character development, and a vampire that turns into the draconic Quetzalcoatl is pretty cool. And they did back off using Death as a character in the first series, so, you know, maybe he's a stand-in for Death, right? And then, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, things start going downhill pretty quick. Time skip. Richter can't do magic because he's all traumatized. He lives with Maria and her mother Tara Renard, who have taken him in, and Tara was ripped from this priestess that you can save in Rondo of Blood. She's basically just a reference. Maria is a French revolutionary, and vampires have kind of become an everyday thing because they've nestled up to the nobility, and things are already too complicated. By episode 2, it becomes blatantly obvious that Castlevania Nocturne has a message about freedom, slavery, oppression, and revolution. And that's fine. 1792 is a great time period to talk about that, you know, because of French Revolution, duh. However, the way they went about it was incredibly unbalanced. For instance, in a video, depending on what I'm talking about, I might say that Donald Trump is a criminal and traitor and deserves to rot in prison for the rest of his life. But that's it, you know, statement made onto the point, which is talking about Castlevania Nocturne. However, this series made the message the point instead of being Castlevania. There's a bunch of new or changed characters that are added in and take up precious runtime in order to emphasize this message, which is kind of bare bones and duh stuff. That said, I think that it's an important message, but either state it and move on, or instead of being so ham-fisted, weave it in intricately into the plot and stick to the reason why people are here, which is to see vampires get fucking slaughtered. They also went so far into inclusion that it became tokenism. Case in point, Annette. You want to make Annette black? That's awesome. You want to make her an escaped slave? That's really cool character development. You want to turn her into a superhero that's descended from the gods with ancient African metal magneto powers who barely knows the main characters and is constantly distracted by an opera singer? I think you've taken things too fucking far. I love inclusion. That's not the issue. The issue is that you have 8 episodes. 8 23-minute episodes. If you add in Annette as a main character, her buddy Edward, Tara as Maria's mom, an ancient Aztec vampire who's gay and is in love with a church muscle man named Mizrak who is also gay, an ancient Egyptian vampire queen who is white, and a sketchy priest and a vampire cult and dealing with the loss of a mother from 3 different angles, and late 18th century politics that are supposed to mirror current day politics. I think you've added in too much shit. It's Castlevania. You jump and you whip. Yes, you can expand on that and you can make it really, really cool. But anything that expands too much is eventually going to explode and collapse in upon itself. Castlevania Nocturne is so dense, yet from episode 1 to episode 7, basically nothing happens. Richter is a big fat crybaby, Maria is a cliche hot-headed revolutionary, and Annette is a brooding impulsive numbnuts and gets her friend and benefactor killed and turned into a demon. But because of the power of opera, he's able to maintain his soul. I don't think the Nocturne part of the title was supposed to be taken so literally, guys. So what is even the conflict? Good question. Essentially, this vampire cult is worshiping this vampire messiah named Elizabeth Bathory, who's coming to town, I guess. She's preceded by her faithful servant, Drolta Zuentes, and the previous mentioned Olrox, who's kind of doing his own thing. So, no Death, no Shaft, and no Dracula. See, the funny thing about Dracula is he's kind of important, especially to the 2 games that the series is supposed to be kind of like going through and weaving into. He's always the main dish. He's the big bad guy. He's the reason all these lesser villains get together and they want to resurrect him because he's the most badass. It's his castle that is Castlevania. But if you're a major Castlevania nut, you're going to recognize the names that I just went through, right? Elizabeth Bathory or Elizabeth Bartley, Drolta Zuentes, and Olrox. The first was a boss from Castlevania Bloodlines on the Sega Genesis, and I told you, see, we get there. She's the vampire niece of Dracula who, let's say it together, wanted to resurrect Dracula. Of course, she did all of this in 1917, where Nocturne is taking place in 1792, and she was only able to begin that process because Drolta Zuentes, who has had a major glow up in this anime, resurrected her. And originally Drolta was just like this old witch. Olrox was a boss from Castlevania Symphony of the Night, not really a major one, but he did have a part of the castle kind of dedicated to him. And yes, he was able to transform into a lizard, but other than a nod to him in the DS games, he wasn't really important except for this like one light novel, which I don't even know if it was translated into English, and it takes place in 2037. And again, you know, cool, deep cuts, whatever, but you got 8 episodes, guys. Save it. Now, Erzsébet Bathory is a cool grab from history and from the games. Sure, you want to displace her in the timeline, fine. You're never going to animate Castlevania Bloodlines anyway. But in the real world, she was a noble serial killer from Hungary who was said to bathe in the blood of her victims, which that was a bit of an exaggeration, but she did torture, mutilate, and kill them, stab them full of needles, like all that stuff, and there was a lot of them. But in Castlevania, she makes an awesome vampire because she was one of, if not the most prolific and brutal female serial killers of all time. So in Nocturne, they made her Sekhmet. Yeah, like she's literally an Egyptian god, but she's white though. Not even gonna try to figure that out. Like, why are you gonna work so hard for inclusion to the point of tokenism when you're going to make an actual god of an African country a white chick? Anyway, as far as Drolta goes, I think she's also Egyptian in the show, and I think she's supposed to be a vampire, but she's like out during the day, and when she fully transforms, she looks strikingly similar to the succubus in Rondo of Blood, so that may have been an attempt to kind of have something from that game in this show, but I don't know because nothing else did. So let me give you a breakdown of the story. This is obviously gonna have spoilers in it. Richter's mom dies. He's sad. He then goes to France and kills the occasional vampire with his adoptive sister Maria, who's decidedly not 12, but still has the same powers that she did in Rondo of Blood. She's obviously a French revolutionary. She hates the church and the bourgeoisie and feels that the common people are oppressed. Her mother Tara is a witch from Russia who takes Richter in. Vampires start showing up more often, and then night beasts, which are foot soldiers that are created by a forge master. This was covered like heavily in the original series, but wasn't really that important in the games. You're just supposed to assume that Dracula summoned his foot soldiers from hell. Edouard and Annette show up out of nowhere to help fight the night beasts. They're looking for Richter for reasons. The four then go to check out the vampire estate, but Annette gets too feisty and basically gets Edouard killed. You start hearing about the vampire messiah. Also, Edouard wasn't actually killed. He was turned into a night beast, but again, power of opera saved his soul, so now he's just kind of like singing in the basement. We learn that the vampire messiah is Erzsébet Bathory, and that Tara once escaped her back in Russia when she had her whole village kidnapped, and then she had to kill her sister, and then she ran away. And then we get Annette and Edouard's backstory. Annette was originally a slave from Saint-Domingue who worked on a sugar plantation that was owned by a vampire. Her mother was like doing spells, and then they killed her, and then eventually Annette grew up and ran away, was taken in by Edouard, and then was taught her African magical powers by a priestess, and then they did the whole plantation burning revolution thing, and then the priestess has this crazy vision that it's gonna be bad in Europe, so then Annette and Edouard go out to find Richter Belmont, because I guess he was in the vision or something like that. Olrox shows up in France and gets horny for Mizrak. Edouard, who's been turned into a demon, shows up in a fight, and they're like, oh my god, Edouard, and then he actually saves Annette, which shows that he's not bad. We learned that the sketchy anti-revolutionary priest is also a devil forge master and is working with the vampires. Knowing that Edouard is not a bad guy, the crew storms some basement, and they don't save him. Olrox then jump scares Richter, and Richter runs away like the big baby that he is. Annette hunts down her former master because he's come to France for this whole Messiah thing, and shows him the sun after he does this giant monologue about the natural order of the world, which starts with the nobles and then ends in slavery, and he says that it's never going to change. You know, because we're all slaves to the people in power, guys. Did you not know that? Like, thanks, Castlevania. Either way, I think that we're all happy that Annette got her revenge. Turns out that sketchy priest is actually Maria's father, which I could see from a mile away. I don't know about you. And then Richter runs into an old man who can use the vampire killer. And who could he possibly be? Well, he's old and he can use the whip, which only a Belmont can use, and it's just Belmont, or Juste. But actually, this was really cool. Honestly, it was kind of the best part of the show. Juste Belmont was originally the most powerful of the Belmont families. He was the star of Harmony of Dissonance. It was a game on the Game Boy Advance, and it also has multiple endings, but what was really cool is the show has defined its own timeline by choosing one of the endings of that game to be canon. And of course, this was the bad ending when Juste lost his love and his best friend Maxim. That's something that I wouldn't have thought about adding into this series. Then him and Richter get ambushed by vampires, and Richter's magic turns back on for no reason. He literally says he doesn't, it just turned back on. It's like, he's like, yeah, whatever. But it was a cool looking scene. You get the nice cross power, which is, you know, a nod to the magic explosion that you can do in Rondo of Blood, and I believe you can also do it in Symphony of the Night. Then Richter puts on his iconic headband. It's like a really cool scene, but then it's ruined later when Mario's like, girl, you're wearing a headband. Now Elizabeth showed up in France. She has like black electricity powers. I don't really know what it's supposed to be, but everybody's like, oh. Richter reunites with his team, and like the whole time he was gone, Annette was like, oh, he's such a coward, he ran away. But then when he shows up, she's like, I knew you were gonna come back. And then they get all like blushy, like it's like a romantic scene, even though it just comes out of nowhere. There has never been any interest like that shown in these two characters throughout the entire series. It was the worst, so badly done. What? Elizabeth decides it's time for her to ascend into being Sekhmet again, even though she's been a Sekhmet the whole time. I don't really know. But apparently she's the Lord of Hollows because the dark sign appears in the sky and starts leaking humanity. Jokes aside, it's actually a solar eclipse. I don't know if she caused it. She pretends like she does, but I don't think she did. Then she actually does turn into Sekhmet, which looks like her if she was playing a role in the movie adaptation of Cats. So now the plan is to break into the Abbey, rescue Edouard, and send the Devil Forge back to hell, and they completely fail at that. They do the fighting and they lose, and the only reason they're able to get away is because Terra sacrifices herself to Sekhmet to buy them time. So now everybody mommy dead, and just to kick you in the nuts one final time, because I was looking at the runtime, I was like, how are they possibly going to wrap this entire like run up? They got like 5 minutes left. Jolta Zuentes comes out of nowhere, starts fighting with the crew. It looks like they're going to lose, and then she is stabbed in the back from behind by the silver sword, and guess who's got it? Alucard. And for 1 second, I was like, hell yeah, this looks dope. He looks just like he does in Symphony of the Night. It's awesome. And he's like, oh, you're all the precipice of utter defeat. Over.
Nice.
So what's the prognosis? Castlevania Nocturne is a short, bloated show that accomplished basically nothing. It sends a very surface level message regarding the need to stand up to oppression, but it leaves you with the heroes defeated for doing so. This is something that's generally reserved for the second act, right? Think about Empire Strikes Back. You need to have a setback for the heroes, so their triumph means that much more in the end. Instead, our heroes are rescued by Alucard, making him look like some kind of messiah, and the rest of them impotent as they completely lost. It's a series full of insubstantial references and character changes that don't add but take away from the plot. The villain is ill-defined, the goal is ill-defined. Most of the characters aren't particularly likable, except for, Richter when he's not being a giant baby, Terra, and Olrox. Nocturne is also in no way an adaptation of Rondo of Blood. It pulls as much from that game as it does from Bloodlines and Harmony of Dissonance. It's a complete hodgepodge and a mess, but what's worse is it was boring. For as short as the show was, it felt 10 times longer because of the incessant, unnecessary dialogue. And this was an issue that plagued the first series a little bit, but the payoffs were always worth it. This time it was, again, bloated and insubstantial. It far outweighed the action and adventure in an adaptation of an action-adventure game. As far as the presentation, it's, what we expected. There were some points where it was a little bit wonk, but substance-wise, it was nothing but another teaser. And that is the most insulting part. I sat through a boring, bloated TV show with basically no substance, only to be teased at the terrible ending for the potential of something I actually wanted to see. So before you start throwing butts at me, I realized that the original series did a 4-episode run when it began. That was a test run. It was a trial to see if this concept could work, if it could find an audience and generate excitement. And yes, it left us with a tease at the end, which left us wanting more. It was very clear what this was. The reaction was clear and obvious. I think we're beyond that now. There is no reason that this season had to be only 8 episodes long. There is no reason that it needed to spend 6 episodes on backstory and character development for characters that aren't that good. 6 episodes of boring setup for the characters to fail at what is obviously not the end. Castlevania Nocturne is like getting on-disc DLC for a fighting game. The characters are already built into the game. You just gotta wait for the developers to release them and make you pay for them. So make sure you keep that new Netflix subscription that you had to make because they don't want you sharing with your friends anymore, just in case in a year or two, the next season of Castlevania is actually good. So yeah, Castlevania Nocturne sucked, and I'm bummed out. We knew this was coming. We were already planning on making a video for it. I was excited to make a video for it. I was excited for the show. And I don't like making negative content, but like we planned this out. It was going to happen, and here it is. So that's my thoughts. What did you think? Put them in the comments. I guess that's it. Check out our Patreon. It really helps. It keeps the channel alive. It's the only reason we are able to make videos. Next up is going to be a almost 2.5 hour long video about Rurouni Kenshin. We're very excited to put that out, and we're going to follow it up with the next part of our Yu Yu Hakusho series. So hope to see you there. Subscribe if you liked what you saw. And that's it. I'm Mike. This is Bonsai Pop. Goodbye.